My name is Jean Bucaria. I am the Vice President of Now New York. And I have the pleasure today and the honor of introducing a woman leader who knows all about making change in New York, our New York State Attorney General, Letitia James. Attorney General James has never backed down from holding powerful interests accountable. She has been a lifelong fighter for women's rights and a champion for us. And she was also the first Black woman elected to statewide office. As Attorney General, she's fighting the unconstitutional abortion ban in Texas, addressing gun violence in our state, holding police accountable, and defending fair wages and the fair treatment of women in the workplace. So I look forward to hearing what she has to say to us today.
Hello, everyone. This is Letitia James, Attorney General of New York State, with a simple message. Our nation cannot live up to its promise that we are all created equal until we receive equal pay for equal work, until we are free from violence that arises from unequal relationships, until we have the right to make our own decisions about our reproductive health. I want to thank the dedicated, smart, courageous team at Now New York City and your fabulous executive director, Sonia Osorio, for inviting me to be here. Most of all, I want to thank Now's 20,000 members and supporters across our state. Thank you for fighting to make our laws better and fairer. Thank you for holding our businesses and government accountable. And thank you for doing the hard work you are about to engage in today. Teaching, learning, sharing, strategizing. You are harnessing the greatest resource on earth, women power. I want you to know that my office stands with you. I have been active on the issue of gender wage equality since I became a public servant. As New York City public advocate, I introduced the salary history ban in the city council, and now it's state law. As the Attorney General, my office operates a task force for workers' equality. I encourage any woman who has questions about her rights or suspects she is being treated or compensated unfairly to contact us. My office is dedicated to supporting survivors of violence and abuse. We defend their rights in the courts and working with organizations to ensure they have the resources they need. I am using the full powers of my office in the fight for women's reproductive health. When a case against an anti-choice law reaches the appeals level or Supreme Court, I work with other attorneys general to file a friend of the court brief. When there's a lawsuit to be filed, we file it, as we did in 2020 when we fought back against federal attempts to raise the cost of abortion coverage. When we see our rights under assault here in New York State, we sue, as we did in multiple cases of harassment outside of clinics in the city and upstate. Let me conclude by saying that everything that I have been doing has been powered by you, the women, our allies, who get out there and organize, energize, fight, and vote. We've come a long way with a long way to go. But to quote Dr. King, we are here because of your deep-seated belief that democracy, transformed from thin paper to thick action, is the greatest form of government on earth. Thank you. Women power.
Thank you so much to the Attorney General. I love that message. And I think everything that we've been talking about today so far really goes into the point of why we're all a part of the National Organization for Women, and that is about taking action. And there are just so many ways in which we can take action. There's sometimes, I understand it could also be a little overwhelming. What can I do next? But I think the key thing that we're here to talk about today is that there's many ways to get involved, and you have to pick one. You just have to start with one thing. I'm going to go into some of the legislative agenda items that we're going to be looking at as we go into 2022 today and going through some of those things. And legislative change is really critical. We know that by changing our laws that we're able to defend our rights. But I also think it's important to make the point that the core of this work is changing people's hearts and minds. And that can be through one-on-one conversations. That has to be, we just had this conversation on abortion access and abortion rights. And part of destigmatizing abortion is saying the word abortion and being willing to have conversations about it directly with people, asking your employer if they have it in their employee manual that you can get time off if you're in need of that care. There's all sorts of ways that we can approach issues. And I think that in addition to the one-on-one, then there's the action, there's the collective action. And if we can mobilize the public and get out there in the streets and demand change, that's something that we all do. So I just want to start out, I'll start out first with talking about childcare. I think that we have some slides. Thank you. And so the point I want to make here, I mean, I think I'm starting off with this today, mostly because the pandemic has really just shown a light on what we rely on in our society for it to function. And we saw the ways in that so many essential workers, whether that's people who work in grocery stores, whether that's nurses and caregivers, and of course, our teachers and schools, we saw the importance of having all those things function, because without it, society really grinds to a halt and our economy grinds to a halt. And so this is what infrastructure is. That's what we're seeing now. And this is the human side to infrastructure, that we really can't progress as a society if we don't invest in these essential workers and in these specific roles that allow us all to go on and live our lives and thrive. And one of the issues that really was stark during the pandemic was just calling attention to the fact that it is these essential workers who actually are the worst treated and the worst paid in many cases. And childcare is no exception. So before I get to the workers, I just want to take a step back and look at this slide, because not only is it important that, of course, the childcare workers are paid well, but childcare is something that many people rely on, that families rely on, that women rely on in order to, have their jobs and support their families and thrive. Yet it can cost up to 30% of our income for childcare. For some single families, it can cost single parent families, it can cost up to 50%. This is not sustainable. This is not accessible. So what can be done about that? Another issue that to go over with the accessibility is that a majority of New Yorkers live in a place where childcare is not nearby, and that's known as a childcare desert. And so it's not available near us, it's not affordable, and that is a real problem. And we have to look to how the United States as a country thinks about this and how our state thinks about it. It's quite shocking to note that the US invests only $500 per child on early childhood education in our country. And when you compare this to other countries, the average is $14,000 for wealthy nations. And when people say wealthy nations, they automatically think, oh, it must be the Nordic countries, but this is also Chile, this is also Slovenia. So we're not just talking about the wealthiest countries. I mean, we're not just talking about the Nordic countries or the examples that we often think of. We're actually looking at this in a holistic way. And now I want to talk about the workers that provide the early child care. So that's the next slide. So overwhelmingly, this is a women-led workforce. 95% of childcare workforce is women. And that is not only just the people that are providing the care, but it's also, think about the childcare centers in your neighborhood. That is run by women entrepreneurs. So it's women that rely on the care disproportionately because women are still taking on the primary caregiving role. But it's also local business owners who are women, and it's also the women that are relied on for delivering the care to our children. And I wanted to actually read this quote because I just think that it's so important to make this point. Continuing to pay early educators poverty level wages out of an expectation that women, especially women of color, will continue to do this work for almost free, either out of love for children or because they have few other options, perpetuates sexism, racism, and classism in the United States. And we'll see this when we talk about some of the other workers that are essential in our lives. But when work that is disproportionately, where women are disproportionately represented is too often devalued, undervalued, and underpaid. And whether that's the free work that a majority of women are doing um, at home, or it's the work of our early childhood educators, this is something that it's really vital that we change. So why does childcare matter? I think this is obvious to some extent, but I mean, obviously, as a country, as an as a state, we need to know that our children are well taken care of. Um, in order for us to go to work and live our lives, we rely on childcare. And right now, we're relying on what is a very patchwork, incomplete system that does not serve as many families as it needs to be serving. This is also an economic issue. Businesses across New York State were polled in the last year. Business leaders were asked what impacts their business negatively, and childcare is a real reason. When childcare is not accessible, businesses are impacted in a negative way. They're unable to retain employees and hire employees. And so this really works out to support businesses in the economy as well as families. And then, of course, as I mentioned, for women in the workforce, it is not only about being able to go to work, but it's also about who is providing that care. And those are workers that need to be fairly valued, and because they are doing vital, what they're doing is vital. And furthermore, again, it's women entrepreneurs for the most part who are running the local child care centers, and they really need a bigger investment, because despite the fact that they are getting paid what seems like a lot of money from families, they are still really functioning at the margins and barely able to pay their workforce what they deserve to be paid. And the last point, of course, is why are we doing this? Is because it's a really important investment. There is study after scientific study that demonstrates that the first years of a child's life are a period of rapid brain development, that children need care and attention at that point, and that is an investment in the future. And if we need to, as a country, really make a broader investment in childcare if we really care about our future. The outcomes for children that have a strong early childhood education are far better, almost on every marker. And so there's a couple of things that we can get started on. So the first thing is Build Back Better. Sonia mentioned this earlier, and really, it's so important that we fight to keep childcare in the Build Back Better Act. Unfortunately, we have to actually still continue the fight, because the last that I was seeing was that some of the paid family leave measures have been cut out of Build Back Better already. But we can't let that happen to childcare, and we actually shouldn't let that happen for paid family leave as well. Paid parental leave, that is something that's very vital. But right now, that money that's in the Build Back Better Act for childcare is going to be able to fund early childhood education for 3s and 4-year-olds. It's going to expand the tax credit that a lot of families have already been receiving on a monthly basis, which can be transformative for families to be able to provide for their kids. And it's also going to cap what families have to pay out for childcare. So they're not paying 30% to 50% of their income, almost saying that you're paying your whole work check is going to pay for the childcare. That's what some families are facing right now. So we need to fight for what's in that act, because that money is going to come to our state. And there's a big agenda in New York State to expand the childcare that we have. And if we're going to be able to implement that agenda, we're going to need some of this federal money. The second thing is there is a New York State Childcare Availability Task Force that has done tremendous work. It was led by Governor Hochul when she was lieutenant governor. And there's a lot of important information in the work that they've done. But it's important that we expand that task force so they can, first of all, represent more people across the state and have reflect the diversity of our state, but also so that there's a mechanism for checking on the implementation of bills that have to do with improving childcare in our state. And this is going to go for every single action I'm talking about today. But get in touch with your legislators. If you don't know who they are and you haven't met them yet, call them up, put it on your calendar. Maybe, Monday is your child, the first Monday of the month is your child care day. Maybe it's another issue that you think is important, but reach out and let them know that this is something that you want to see. The Empire State Child Care Campaign, we are a member of that campaign, and other organizations and individuals can join it and sign up. And I think that is going to be a key source of information. Already, there are a couple of leaders at the state level who have put forth the idea that we would have universal childcare in our state, that we need something that's going to provide quality care while treating workers well and providing enough support for small childcare based centers to be able to function well. And in order to do all of that, they're going to have to hear from all of us. So I think this is one issue that really, cuts across a lot of different things. And I hope that you'll get involved. So now let's move on to something else. Comprehensive sex education. When I was listening to the conversation earlier, I think one thing that we're talking about, we've talked about already today, and that we're going to be talking about more in the next upcoming panel discussion, is this importance of the intersection of the issues that we care about and that we work on. And I think that this issue of comprehensive sex education is one that, that really makes this point. If we're thinking about reproductive justice, the ability to determine when or whether to become a parent, the ability to have bodily autonomy, and also, if you are a parent, the safety and the ability for your kids to thrive and be safe in their own lives. Comprehensive sex education actually covers all of those things. Right, but yet, even though it's so vital, New York State only requires HIV/AIDS instruction. That is the only thing that is mandated statewide. So I think a lot of people may find this surprising, and especially I know here in New York City, for instance, sex education did become a requirement some years ago. But again, it's something that it's only taught very sporadically, and it really depends, can vary school to school. So it's something that is really important that we invest in, because if we want to teach young people to be safe and give them the skills and the power over their own body to make decisions for themselves, it's really important that that we have this education integrated throughout the school experience. And so let's go into why this matters so much. And I think there's a lot of reasons why this matters. But first of all, it's about safety. We see that teens in our state are representing more than half of the sexually transmitted infections, and that doesn't need to be the case. If children in the older grades are given the information that they need to make informed choices, then we can prevent this rise in sexually transmitted infections. And also, obviously, I think this is the thing that people think about the most when they think about sex ed. They also think about the prevention of unintended pregnancy. And we know that this has ramifications in so many ways, including that young women who do become pregnant during school fare more poorly and tend to drop out of school. About almost a third of young women may drop out of high school because of becoming pregnant. So this is another reason, is just to give our youth the tools to make the decisions that will empower them in their lives. And the other thing I think is there's a lot of misinformation around this, but when we teach young people about sex education in an open, informed way, it actually has demonstrated, I think the Academy of Pediatrics has said that those that learn about it are more likely to delay sex. So it has the opposite impact. And then when they do engage in sex, they have the tools they need, or they know what they can use to prevent pregnancy and what they can use to prevent STIs. I think something that's not on this slide that's also important to mention is the importance of empowering LGBTQ youth in the classroom and at school. If we want to prevent bullying, we have to give our kids the language to talk about issues, to talk about gender identity, to understand sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And those are all things that are part of comprehensive sex education. And those are all things that are vital if we want to ensure that every single student, regardless of their if they're gender nonconforming or the LGBTQ, can feel a sense of belonging, can understand that this is something that others are experiencing, or this is the way that other people identify. And that education is the first step to prevent the bullying that can have really detrimental effects. Then moving back, we know that if we want to prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault and intimate partner violence, we need young people to understand what it means to have a healthy relationship. And we're just not going to be able to do that if we don't include this in the education in the schools. And so we see in New York State, 10% of teenagers reporting that they're experiencing dating violence. And this is really, um, this is really problematic, because if you're experiencing that at a young point in your life, it's something that's going to set up potential issues for you throughout your life. And we need to make sure that the early signs of intimate partner violence can be recognized, because sometimes those signs are not as obvious. So they can be things like, asking to share pictures, or having someone, uh, having your partner asking you to text them where you are at all times, things that maybe could seem flattering, actually are signs of impending abuse. And so this is one tool that we have to prevent sexual assault and sexual harassment and abuse, is for people to understand consent, understand their body, and understand and practice ways to take control in different situations. And then the last that really goes hand in hand with this is what I was just talking about, which is that it also prevents and stops child sexual abuse. So one of the most important ways to prevent this type of abuse is simply teaching children directly about it. And this is what happens in the younger years. Again, a lot of misinformation when comprehensive sex education is proposed. I think there was already an article about kindergartners learning about X, Y, and Z. That just wasn't the case. But this is really important, that kindergartners, first and second graders understand how to name their body parts, understand that they can say no, understand that there are body parts that are private. Those are all things that play into making sure that children are safe. And unfortunately, we saw this actually happen recently. There was a story in upstate New York. A principal just resigned in September after a local child advocacy organization came into the school and did a 3-day training. Um, a number of students came forward that were being abused, and it was found that this principal had been abusing kids in the school for many years, and now has been put to a stop. So this is really about keeping our youth safe and healthy, and giving them the power in their own lives to set boundaries and understand what those boundaries are. So what can we do? There actually is legislation in this for this right now, sponsored by Senator Brooke and Assemblymember Nolan. And so how can we get this done? I mean, the first step, again, call your own rep, make sure that they're supporting this. Are they co-sponsoring it? Our legislative session in New York is from January through June. So we have a little bit of time. We're kind of laying the groundwork now, but when that's up and running, it's important to make sure that your voice is heard. You can also call the Senator Meyer, Shelley Meyer, who is the head of the Education Committee, and she needs to hear from you, and also the top legislators need to hear from all of us. So I hope that this is a place where you will join us and fight for this legislation to be passed. So I know I could see that I'm running a little low on time, but I did want to mention home health care workers, another issue that we've worked on for several years. And there is a really great Now This video that's I think we could put in the chat. And I would say that all of you should watch it, because it really shows what these workers are up against and what they're facing. Again, this is a majority women of color workforce and an immigrant women workforce. And they are contracted out by a variety of different companies across the city. A lot of them work for very small organizations that train them, and And that's how they are able to connect with a home and provide home health care that a lot of our seniors need. But what's happening is that some of them are being forced and asked to work 24-hour shifts, which means that they can't actually go home. And they may be forced to do these 24-hour shifts for several days in a row, or even weeks on end in some cases. And those that have decided to say no to the shifts have found that they're retaliated against by their employer, whether they're taken off of some of their shifts or they are not able to receive the pay that they deserve. So the problem really stems from the fact that here in New York State, the law is that they are paid for 13 hours of the 24-hour shift, um, assuming that they're only working for 13 hours, and then their sleep time is not paid and their meal time is not paid. But the reality, as you'll see in the video that was shared, if you have a chance to watch it later, is that the seniors that that are being cared for by home health care workers need this care around the clock. They're calling throughout the night. They need support and help, and it's very taxing and it's not sustainable for the workers themselves. And so it's really important that I think we could pull up the legislation. It's really important that we pass this legislation to end the mandatory 24-hour shifts. This was first introduced in 2019. We spoke with Assemblymember Epstein. He will be reintroducing it in the coming legislative session. But this will really put an end to the forced mandatory 24-hour shifts. And I think that this will protect the health and the dignity of the home care workers. Again, this is a workforce that is made up of essential workers that so many seniors rely on. And are they really getting the best care if those people who are taking care of them can't get a good night's sleep and can't attend to their own needs and their own families? So this is a way that we can balance that, and it's something that I hope that you'll join us in supporting. So I'm almost running out of time to move on to our next section, but I just wanted to call attention to a couple of other things. Obviously, we have a big legislative agenda coming up, and we're going to be updating our website with all of this as we get ready for the session in January. But it's important to note that there's a few other bills to just go through. We want to close New York's intoxication loophole. This is something that would provide a route for survivors of sexual assault and violence to have a better chance of getting their cases heard in court. If someone is drinking and they decide to drink themselves, and that drink is given to, they're voluntarily drinking, uh, and they are targeted for a sexual assault, it's a lot more difficult to pursue a case in the state with our current laws. So this would change that. We want to pass an inclusive equal rights amendment in our state. We don't have an equal rights amendment in our state constitution. And this will be a multi-year process because in order to get change in the Constitution, this has to be voted on several years in a row. So it's really important that we continue to lay this groundwork now. And then just touching on some of the federal bills that I think are vital, I had put in the chat during the last panel, we talked about the Women's Health Protection Act. And if Roe is no longer going to protect us, then we have to write this into our federal laws to make sure that abortion is accessible and affordable across the country. And last, the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act is something that has not been reauthorized in an official way since 2017, which is really unconscionable. There are really vital changes to the legislation that need to be made that take into account all the learning that happens every year on how best to serve survivors. We've come, things, as a result of Me Too, a lot has changed on sexual assault and our response to it since 2017. And it's really important that we get this into our law and make sure that the organizations that are serving survivors are able to get the funding that they need. So both of those bills that I mentioned there have been passed in the House. Now it's up to the Senate. And so we're going to be needing to put that pressure on. And again, we're in New York, so we can reach out to our allies in other states whose senators may not be as supportive, but there's a lot that we can do here. And I'll just close with saying that it's important that we continue to connect. Now New York is going to be here working on all of these issues. We will send these slides out after the conference. We will send out links to more information on all these things that I touched on today, so that you can have access to that. Reaching out and meeting your representatives, your state senators, your state assembly person, that is a great way for you to make sure that they hear the stories about how these issues are impacting you. Getting calls directly from constituents is powerful and is really critical. And as we're going to talk about in our next panel, we have to mobilize and keep getting out the vote, because if we don't have the leaders that are going to support our issues in office, it just creates, it ties our hands in how much we can do. So I hope you'll keep learning, organizing, uh, not giving up, because that's what we need to do to get these changes made.